You might think that 2 minutes doing this or a minute doing something else doesn't seem worth it, but actually, in terms of your health pension, each activity that you do is putting a little something in the bank, and you might not see the results now or next week or next month, but in the long run, they will be there.
Today's episode is one I think every single one of us needs to hear, because Angela White, better known as the running granny, shows us what's possible when we stop letting age, doubt, or old stories decide what we're capable of. Angela didn't begin running until she was 53, and since then she's completed some of the most extraordinary endurance challenges you can imagine, including 875 miles from John O'Groats to Land's End, a Guinness World Record, and 62 Lakeland peaks at the age of 62. But this episode isn't really about the big dramatic achievements, it's about the message underneath them. Angela spent her career as an orthopaedic surgeon watching firsthand what inactivity does to us as we age, and she decided to live and lead by example. Her story is a reminder that healthy aging isn't luck, it's built. One choice, one step, one small habit at a time. And that's why she's here today. Not to make anyone feel like they need to run an ultra marathon, but to show us that it's never too late to start moving differently, to take our health seriously, and to invest in the bodies we want to live in for decades to come. This is a conversation about possibility at any age, and I can't wait for you to meet her. Angela, in your 30s, you retrained as a doctor and then went on to become an orthopaedic surgeon, which is an amazing feat in itself in your 30s and with a family. You then, jumping forward a big jump in time, decided to start running in your early 50s. I'd love to know what happened in between that made you make that decision in your early 50s.
Yeah, the actual decision to run, it wasn't a black or white, oh, I think I'll just start running. I think for most people, those working or with a career, as they go through their 30s and 40s, particularly if they do happen to have children as well who are growing up, life is incredibly busy. They have less and less time for themselves, but also they're heading towards, in their 40s, they're heading towards those sandwich years where they do possibly have dependents who are, increasingly taking up their time with more and more of their own activities, and the concerns that we have with adolescents and so on these days in the wider world. But also that's the point where older members of the family or friends or possibly partners might well start to suffer some ill health themselves. And I was no exception there. And it ended up being the case that in my, what would I have been? So about 47, I had 3 close family members who were all ill, seriously ill at the same time within the space of a few months. I, being a physician, in fact, they weren't local either. So being a physician in the family, I was called upon by many others to answer their questions, and there wasn't much, including the relatives themselves, there wasn't much consideration that I might personally have been emotionally impacted by what was going on. Anyway, the 4 became ill in the space of about 4 months, and then within a very short space of time, and within 4 months, each of the 3 sadly died. After the last death, I had took a couple of weeks off work because it was highly personal, highly traumatic. But then I went back to work and I threw myself into work, and I basically didn't give myself time to grieve at all. I think I'm just one of those people who many people, particularly women, who just get on and do. Things need to be done, and we do them. But everything, again, I was at a point in my career where I had lots of experience. I had my, computer experience as well. So I had various roles within the hospital, various responsibilities. And I just kept taking on more and more. And what happened over the next couple of years was that I didn't have any time for myself. So children were still around, needing support as well. And I got less and less fit, more and more overweight. And quite unhappy, to be honest. And I came to the point where I kept getting glimpses of this person, but that I didn't really recognise, but didn't do anything about, because there were always more email to deal with and so on and so forth. And then it just started to not be quite so well myself. And one of these glimpses, I just stopped and took stock and decided, actually, if you don't start looking after yourself, you're not going to be able to look after anybody else. So what I did was to start what I now look back on and call my small steps. And it started with just going for a walk. So I would take 10 minutes in the evening after supper just to go out for a walk. And I found it incredibly difficult to do that, because I felt guilty. I felt that I was walking away from all those responsibilities that I'd managed to persuade myself were far more important than my own needs. So the response, the more email that needed to be answered, the fact that the children were in the house, that there were chores that needed to be done, whatever. There was always something else that needed to be done. And taking that 10 minutes I did feel very guilty. And I think that's a challenge for all of us, is making that time for us. But I was just so out of breath going for those few, so out of breath, and it seemed so hard just to take that, to go for those walks. But I persisted with doing so, and so that was my very first step. It was just that walking, and then I sort of increased it. It might be 12 minutes, might be 15 minutes, or what have you. But then my need to be efficient got the better of me, and I decided that what I could do to make better use of my walking time was to take my phone with me. So the next thing was, well, maybe I could catch up, because over that period of time, over the period of the illness and the intervening years, I had lost touch with so many people. Phone conversations had become functional. They were either about work. In fact, I spoke to people at work more than I spoke to my family, let alone friends. So I took my phone with me. But that in itself was really hard as well, because I found myself thinking, well, I could ring people, but what if they don't want to speak to me? What if they feel that I've ignored them so long that they're no longer interested? And I think and I talk about this now, we all have 70% of our thoughts are negative, and we all have 20 ways to kill an idea. And so we might have a good idea, but then almost before the idea has passed through the brain, on come all the reasons why you shouldn't do it, or why it's not possible, or would be ridiculous, whatever those 20 ways, negative ways are.
Which is human nature, because it's the whole survival instinct, isn't it? It's saying anything that's going to make us feel slightly uncomfortable, slightly risky at all. No, let's stay safe.
Yeah, it is. So it took me a while to do it, but and then I had to add that, well, what's the worst that can happen? well, they could hang up the phone on me, and yes, I'll feel awful, but at least I've tried. So I did, and actually people were delighted to hear from me. But it was at that point then that, talking to people, and they'd say, "What are you doing? You sound really out of breath." And well, actually, I'm because where I live, it's very undulating. So I'm walking up a hill. So, but over time, so from the walking, I started to notice that my clothes were a little bit looser on me. I did become less breathless. But I also started looking at other things as well. I started looking at what I was eating, what I was drinking. I started to think about other social activities. So at one point, I joined an upholstery class and reupholstered a couple of things, things that needed doing and something I was curious about. It's about finding different activities. Could be just going back and looking at other hobbies, but one way or another. Anyway, this went on for, I think I published about 30 different small steps that I actually did over that time, 30 different ways of doing things. So even if people introduce one a month, there's 2.5 years worth of different ideas for them. And then I happened to notice a little advert somewhere or other. I think I was looking for a gift for somebody, and I noticed this on it. And it was a lady who was setting up a running group for mature ladies or people returning from injury. So this would have been late 2011, I suppose.
And what age were you then?
52. So going on 53. Late 2011, early 2012. Anyway, it took me, I'd made a note of the number, but it took me 3 weeks to actually pick up the phone, because 20 ways to kill an idea. Who am I to think I could go and do that? Look ridiculous. I'll be at the back. I'll hold everybody up. People will laugh at me, whatever. And eventually I did pick up the phone, and I spoke to and met Sandra. And Sandra, who is now a very good friend, she started running when she was 62. At the time I met her, she was 67. And I joined her little group. And over the following few weeks, I learned that she was training to take on something called the Joss Naylor Lakeland Challenge, which was just completely, it was foreign language to me. 48 miles across the Lakeland tops in a linear route, taking in 30 tops and 17,000 feet of descent. And it's a challenge that is the time you have to do it is age related. So you can't do it until you're 50, and then you get so many hours at 50, and then at 55 you get an extra couple at 60 and so on. And because she was over 65, she had 24 hours to do it. Anyway, she also told me about some of the, this just sounded so far removed from anything I might have imagined. But she also told me some of the little adventures, should we say, that she would have, because maybe NAF wasn't quite what it could have been. And I thought, this is mad. She really shouldn't be out there on her own. This is me saying, this is me applying this list of things that you're not permitted to do at certain ages or at certain, because that's where I was at the time. In my head, I thought, she shouldn't have done. So I offered to go out with her. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing, but I offered to go on go and do some of her recce's with her. And I suppose I was curious as well. But it was with some anxiety that I bought my first pair of fell shoes and a rucksack, and joined her on her first outing. And just haven't looked back.
And the rest is absolute. The rest is really amazing history, because so that was sort of 52, 53.
I was 53 when I started.
53. And then within 10 years, you have run so many miles. I can't imagine how many miles you've run. But the most important thing is you set yourself some goals that, again, like you were looking at her goal, you probably would never have imagined a few years before. And most of us could never imagine. And yet you're very strong on the fact it's really not about the goal and the achievement, the size of it. It's very much about the small steps, as you called them. They got a bit bigger for you. But it's putting in that time and effort for yourself to look after yourself for the future. So, spoiler alert, I've got to say what they are, obviously, because people are dying to know. So the first one was Joggle, which is John O'Groats to Land's End, which, if I'm right, is 875 miles.
I
is that
do,
correct?
Yeah. Everybody's route is slightly different.
Unbelievable.
Ended up being that.
Which, okay, unfathomable. But even more so, the fact you did it in just under 19 days is absolutely incredible. And that was Guinness World Record holding for your age at the time. Just incredible. And that was 2019. And then literally just a few years later, obviously didn't put you off, but then you started to go up and downhill, my goodness. And you did the 62 peaks in 60 at the age of 62. And you've got a wonderful film on YouTube that I'm going to link in the show notes that talks about how a lot of fell runners like to do a certain number of peaks at a certain age, which I thought was really amusing in itself. And you start out in the film by saying, I didn't want to leave it much later because obviously the peaks are going to add up, which I thought was really funny. And 45,000 feet elevation gain. And that's a lot, but it's not just a lot of up. It's an awful lot of going down. And from what I could tell from your film, like me and like many, actually going down really is almost more nerve-wracking experience for you. And yeah, I urge everyone to watch the film because the support was absolutely incredible. But that aside, so you've chosen to do these goals. You also do other ultra marathons, long distance, and so on. What gave you the very first idea to do something really long distance? And how did you sort of get the courage? Why did you believe that you could do that from ultimately doing your 10, 15-minute walks at night?
So, so I go back to supporting Sandra. I ended up that year, a few months later, after doing the records with her, she did her first attempt at the Joss Challenge, which unfortunately she didn't complete because she had a fall and damaged her back. But I continued training with her once she was able to get back out again. And the following year, at the age of 68, I supported her the whole way through that event, the whole 48 miles. In the 24 hours, she actually took 23 hours and 58 minutes. And
oh, brilliant. I'm so pleased.
Joss Naylor met her at the end, as he did at that time when he was able to. And he said, well, lass, you made the most of your day. But I think from that point on, I mean, she was a huge inspiration to me. And from that point on, I having done that distance, I then thought, well, I was curious to know what else I could do. So I did actually, unfortunately, break my ankle a few months later. So that put me out for the best part of a year. But as I got back into it, I then ran my own first 50 miler in October 2014, which was the inaugural Lakes in a Day, from a linear route from Coldbeck in the north of the Lake District over various ridges, including the Helvellyn Ridge, but ending up in Cartmel in the south. An super event, which was put on, was the race director was a friend of mine, and put on some fantastic events. So I did that year. That was 2014. Something called the Tour de Helvellyn, which again I've done a number of times. which is always run on the Saturday before Christmas, and it's a 38-mile loop which takes in the circuit of Helvellyn amongst other things, but without going actually over the top. Always challenging. The weather's different every year, from snow to floods when we had Storm Desmond and so on. And then in 2016, I did something again, the inaugural Northern Traverse, which is 190 miles from coast to coast, west to east across the country, using Alfred Wainwright's coast to coast route. So that goes over the tops, over the Lake District, the Dales, and then the North York Moors. So that was 2016. So I podiumed as third lady on that. And that was literally taking a leap from going from 50 miles to 190 miles, which was huge. I had no idea whether that was possible. I did that as a sponsorship event. So that was that. And then the following year, I did my first 100-miler, which is a completely different event from because it's 100 miles you're expected to do in a much shorter period of time, whereas the longer you go, the longer you can take to do it. And I won that one completely by surprise. Well, I'd say won it first lady. And I was just curious at what your body can do. Just quite extraordinary, really.
And tell me about the mind, because there's such a strong link in our ability to, well, first of all, you were dreaming, you were curious, and you thought, where can this go? And that curiosity in itself is a wonderful skill to hone in itself, because it's the thing that gently pushes you towards and perhaps made you pick up the phone to your friend Sandra, because that curiosity was driving you enough to think, could I do this? And managed to sort of overcome the fears or the barriers. But tell me a little bit about your mindset in general, and what you think people listening, what skills they can hone mentally to be able to help them on their journey of getting going.
I think the key skill is not looking at the whole picture. So it's looking at it in sections. So, I get a huge amount out of running. Running allows me to be who I am, mentally, physically. And it's the ultimate investment in my mobility and independence as I age. It'll be the thing that keeps me strong enough and fit enough to get to the toilet in time, to be able to do my own shopping, get my own wood in for the fire, that sort of thing. So there's that's the overriding objective. How I get there, who knows how it's going to pan out, particularly as I now have a long-standing and deteriorating knee injury. But it's breaking things down. So much as I love running, there are aspects of what I do that, you certainly don't welcome getting completely wet feet, completely sodden inside. If it's apocalyptic, I don't welcome being cold. I don't welcome the sleep deprivation. But it wouldn't be a challenge if there weren't these things to overcome. So their partner does love it. And when the going gets tough, you literally might be just thinking, right, let's just get to that dry stone wall. Let's just get to that next tree. Let's just get to that next rock. Let's just count in. I use counting a lot. So, counting to 100. I might look at a hill and think, oh,
that's a lot of hundreds.
How many hundreds are we going to take to get up there? But I know people who count in 25s. So we all use similar staging posts, if you like, one way or another. I do masses of amount of maths when I'm out there. I mean, I Yeah, love
I
those.
used to do maths when I was running, actually. Yeah, but I also found it quite a challenge to actually get to the answer. So I was doing things like thinking about my pace and the distance and so on. So I was doing the maths about the run I was doing, and yet I could get so into a zone where I really struggled to get to the end. And yet my partner, when he runs, he's coming up with the answers. It's very different ways that the brain works, and very challenging. I hope you're enjoying the conversation. I'm just taking a quick break to ask you a question. Have you started to notice that the everyday things you used to do without thinking, like getting up off the floor, lifting the shopping, or hopping over a stile, now take more effort than you feel they should? Well, if your answer is yes, you are far from alone. And I'm excited to tell you that I've written a book to help you. It's called Move Well for Life: Unlock the Life-Changing Power of Everyday Movement. As you'll know from listening to this podcast or following me online, I don't talk about chasing fitness trends or imposing rigid routines. Instead, my message is all about learning how small, natural movements woven into your daily life can help you feel stronger, more confident, and ready for whatever life throws at you. Move Well for Life is available to pre-order now, and it's out in January here in the UK and Europe, and later next year in America. You can find the link in the show notes to read more about it, or simply search Move Well for Life and Wendy online. I firmly believe that every movement counts, and it's never too late to reclaim yours. Now, back to the episode. I was just going to say, I love what you've just said, because when we think about the big things, so you've done some really big things, and to many listening, there could be the thought of, well, I'll never do that, and therefore it's less relatable. But what you've just said is so relatable, because everyone fears the big thing, feels overwhelmed about whether it's a movement task or whether it's other tasks in their lives, or something that just seems too big. Caring for someone who is very ill that you love, that is incredibly overwhelming. And yet the way that you've just termed that if we are not looking too far ahead, sometimes it's good to look in terms of health, but at the same time to make sure that we don't overwhelm ourselves and we do take one step at a time. And you did that with your walks. You were just doing one thing. And what I love, I talk a lot about the movement ripple effect and how small things do add up, and it's incredible where they can go. And clearly you're the best example of that. But it's also the effect that your choices have on others that I also find really fascinating, because, for example, you added on to the initial habit of getting yourself walking by ringing people and so using your time more effectively, which is a thing, again, I recommend a lot. Listen to things, call people. If you're calling, walk, rather than thinking who I'm going to call and walking. So use the time you're on the phone, particularly if you're working, go around the block and talk whilst you're on the phone walking. But the other thing you did was that you spoke to people and they said, oh, you sound a bit out of puff. What's going on? And so you said to them, I'm out walking. And that will have sowed a seed in their mind as well. And that's what's so powerful. And I think we don't realize the power of those small choices throughout our day. We don't have to set huge goals, but it's so wonderful to hear people like you who never thought that they could do it. I'm sure if we talked to you in your 40s and said, by the way, this is what you will have achieved, you would have probably said, no, I don't think you're speaking to the right person. No. And yet it's been absolutely possible. And you're very humble about it. And I know, but you are inspiring people hugely by doing that. Some of your main messages, you do great talks now, and obviously you've got this wonderful medical background, so you have a real mix of science in your talks, but also you talk to inspire. I'd love you to talk a little bit about bone health, particularly, because one of the things that I come across with people is I'm mainly teaching about mobility as we aged, to be able to still build strength as well. Strength is part of mobility, but to be able to build foundations of movement that we can then access more and more as we age, to know what those functional things are in life that are really important and are going to become more important if we don't include them. One of the things that has a lot of discussion around it is bone health. And yet I think a lot of people feel something like running isn't necessarily for them. It's too much, and they would fear it. So what would you say to people like that?
Oh gosh, this is a huge subject. So let me go right back. So one of the reasons that I ran John O'Groats to Land's End was because at the time I was trying to establish a movement which we called Going for Old, to promote action for healthy aging. And it came about because I was looking to see whether there was a way that I could combine my running and what I was getting out of it with my concerns for the health of the nation, really, the public health crisis that we have in terms of long-term conditions, plus my experience. And as an orthopod, my special interest was in older people with hip fracture, which was something that I sort of found myself immersed in from, literally within a couple of years of qualifying as a doctor. The average age of somebody with a hip fracture is around 84. It was about 81 then, but we've got this aging population and it's moving out. And the hip fracture itself is generally easily manageable, quickly sorted, but by far the bigger impediments to getting people mobile and back out of hospital into the community is related to the number of long-term health problems that they have. So if I consistently audit findings were that over 50% of all these patients with hip fracture had some form of cardio or cerebrovascular disease, so heart disease or stroke, something of that order. But 8% had diabetes, large numbers had airway disease, depression, anxiety. And the key thing with these conditions is that if you actually stand back from them, many of these are largely preventable with different lifestyle choices that we make. And that's not to say that the choices individuals are making are wrong, but I don't think that the public are, and certainly from an early age, are actually informed and educated about the consequences of the choices that we make. I'm not a political animal, but policies do not help the fact that the food manufacturing and retail industry is permitted to include so much ultra-processed food, ultra-processed material in the foodstuffs that we eat, when they know that we have adverse consequences for the hunger satiety mechanisms in the human body, which mean that we'll eat more of the rubbish stuff rather than less. It's not helpful. You can't avoid it, and I don't want to spoil anybody's fun. What I do want to do is make sure that people are sufficiently well informed and educated that they can make educated choices for themselves. That's all more recent stuff. At the time that I did Joggle, I was more concerned about the fact that 70% of the whole health and care budget was spent on treating people with long-term conditions. Those conditions are treatable, but in the main, not curable. The best way to deal with them is to try and turn off the tap and prevent them happening in the first instance. So that's where the healthy aging focus came from. It was trying to raise awareness of this. In terms of so that was the long-term health problem. In terms of osteoporosis, that's the other condition that results in the osteoporotic hip fractures in the first place. And again, there are so many myths around this.
Well,
frailty is inevitable. Osteoporosis is inevitable. This is not. And also, now osteoporosis isn't reversible. Well, we've known for at least a decade. The evidence is out there from the studies that simply isn't the case. It is reversible.
Can you just share with the audience exactly what osteoporosis is for those who are not absolutely clear? Because I think we often use terms, and I was very conscious there. I don't know exactly what it is, so if you can explain it, that would be really useful.
So osteoporosis is often called the silent disease. It's a bone disorder that results from loss of bone mass. And what happens is that, so let me just wind back. I meet a lot of people who believe that once they're fully grown, that's it. Their skeleton is inert. It doesn't change. And so let's bust that myth to start with. Your skeleton is continually turning over throughout life. As a baby, the skeleton turns over 100% in the first year of life. As an adult, it's now thought to be something around 10 years, although for other people it may be less than that. So about every 10 years, your skeleton is going to not be the one you had 10 years previously. And in actual fact, if you're listening to this podcast, the skeleton that you finish listening to the podcast with will not be identical to the skeleton you started listening with. So, and it comes about for a variety of reasons we won't go into, but basically there are two different types of cells. Some are reabsorbing bone and some are rebuilding bone. And they do that in a variety of ways. But there is something called, so the calcium and the magnesium and phosphates and so on are the minerals which make bone hard. If you didn't have those minerals in bone, it would be flexible. It's formed from a protein called collagen, which is the same stuff that you can pick up on. So would be flexible, not like skin. Lots of different forms of collagen, but the collagen in our skeleton has the ability to be mineralized. So it has these minerals that give it its strength. And basically, as the bone, so as you go through life, as you go through life from 0 to about 30 years, your bone density, as it's called, that hardening bone, grows, provided you're giving it the right stimulus, the right stimuli. So it needs to be fed properly with proteins and calcium and so on and so forth. But it also needs to be exercised, because the biggest stimulus to bone growth, bone density throughout life is physical activity, but particularly from 0 to 30. But then when you get to about 30, something in the blueprint changes, and the cells that are reabsorbing bone become more numerous than those that are building bone. And so there's this very slow decline then in this bone density. In women from about 40 to 45, that decline starts to drop off a cliff because estrogen that we produce has a protective effect on bone. And once we start to lose the estrogen with perimenopause, so the bone density starts to decline very rapidly. But it's also declining slowly in men from 30 right through the rest of their life as well. So osteoporosis itself results from a loss of that bone mass, where more bone is reabsorbed and formed, and that leads to decreased strength. When it comes to a point where it's more likely to fracture, and generally the fractures are caused by a low level of trauma. So those listeners who may know somebody who has had a hip fracture may be aware that they fell off a stool or they fell out of bed. But there may also be those who recognise the pattern where somebody just happened to fall on their, and hit their hand on the somewhere or other and broke a wrist, a fracture that wouldn't normally have occurred earlier in life. And that's potentially something to be concerned about if you're in your 40s and 50s and that happens. And generally, if that's picked up by a clinician, you would be referred for a DEXA scan to just for some screening, just to check that you haven't got early onset osteoporosis. So that's.
And are there any other ways of knowing without a break and without going for regular scans, which are not available unless you pay?
No, there's no screening in this country for the DEXA capability.
So is there any other sign at all?
Generally, no. So unless you've had so osteoporosis is primary, either postmenopausal or by the time you get into your 70s, it becomes known as senile osteoporosis, so 75 years onwards. Or it can be secondary. So people, for example, there are some medications that can predispose you to osteoporosis, such as long-term oral steroid use, which can affect it. There are some anticonvulsants that can do so. And conditions such as malabsorption syndrome, so things like celiac disease, inflammatory bowel conditions, potentially, because if you're not absorbing, you may not be taking in enough protein and enough calcium and so on. And generally, or things like inflammatory arthritis, so rheumatoid. Generally, if you have any of those conditions or you're on any of those medications, then the clinicians looking after you will be mindful of this. If you have particularly first-degree female relatives that have had a hip fracture, that might actually be a trigger for you. But, there's one thing I will just like to pop in there. So I mentioned that between birth and the age of 30, physical activity is the most important stimulus of gaining the maximum peak bone density that you're going to get in life. Sport England regularly do surveys, and they publish the findings. And one particular finding, which is I always try to be mindful of, is that they a few years ago they highlighted the fact that over the age of 13, only about 10% of girls continue with any form of sport. And for me, that is a really huge red flag, because if they're not participating in enough stimulatory physical activity and they don't reach what we currently recognise as potential for peak bone density, if they start at a lower level of peak bone density, when they start to decline, then there is a risk that we will see osteoporotic fragility fractures occurring, earlier in life. So wrist fractures starting before 40, hip fractures starting before 60. And that's a real concern for me for their quality of life, but also for the system, what we now see is a very, very rapidly failing system of social care and healthcare to support people.
Well, on the flip side, let's hope that things like women's involvement and the publicity and promotion of women in sport that has certainly been on the rise in the last, I would say, 5 years, and their prominence, let's hope that is inspiring lots of younger women, and let's hope that we see some changes in those numbers.
Well, I'd like to think so, but I was on a call with a few nights ago with some representatives from different sports clubs in Cumbria, and amongst a number of it wasn't the particular focus of the call, but the conversation came around to the fact that the focus on the number of younger teens who no longer appear at clubs, because it's suddenly become unfashionable for them, if you like, to be doing sport So I'm not sure that message is.
Yes, it's how long it takes to filter through.
Mm.
It's a huge concern. And so that's also up to not just being educated nationally through schools and so on. It's also parents and their ability to encourage children. But if they don't have the knowledge, for example, about the importance of movement for their bones and where that's going to take them, then that's an even harder message to filter down. So the education needs to really be at all levels. Partly why we're having this conversation today, partly to say that, you know, the priority that we put on movement and exercise is not just about, it's not just about fitness as in that the heart fitness. It's very much about your entire being, mentally as well. But and that we need, it's something that is really, really important, because we do need to look forward. And I think we can talk as well. I think it's really important to get the message across also that it's never too late. And you made a big change in your early 50s, which, you know, I would talk about as the second half of your life, because personally I'm aiming at 100. But that's only because my gran lived to 100. So I think I could aim, but we'll see.
I've always said that middle-aged is at least 10 years ahead of where I am, and therefore I'm never going to get middle-aged. So can I just go back to something actually quite important that I've just thought of, and it's not necessarily an indicator, but you asked if there were, what other signs there might be that your bones might not be as strong as you would like. So we don't get feedback from our bones. However, we do get feedback from our muscles. And in the same way that your skeleton turns over, your muscle tissue turns over as well. So the proteins, they're called actin and myosin, inside your muscle cells are continually turning over. They get a bit decrepit, so they get cleared out and you get new ones. And when you train your muscles, where you're giving them an anabolic stimulus to maintain them by continually carrying in the coal, or not that they do these days, but, literally carrying shopping or whatever that sort of manual stuff is, or going to the gym and doing resistance work, which I'm a strong advocate for. That muscle will continue, or the nervous system will continue to work hard, and the muscle will rebuild, and you will continue to both feel your muscles, or see your muscles, but also, so you can get feedback from your muscles. Your muscles will turn over about once every 3 months. So in the same way you'll see a brand new skeleton once every 10 years, you'll actually see a brand new arm or a brand new leg about once every 3 months. Not that you'll see it in that way. The point is you can get those changes in that period of time. If you are noticing a deterioration in the size of your muscles, or more likely you will notice that you're not quite as strong as you are, then it's probably a fairly safe bet that you're not stimulating your bones in the same way either. So they are probably more likely to be deteriorating. Not an exact science, just food for thought, really.
No, I think that's very true, and yeah, that it's a really important link, because the muscle's pulling on the bone, and whatever you're doing with those muscles, the way that you're moving, is really key. So to round off, what would we give? What would you personally give as some practical advice for people, or more importantly, practical encouragement? Because the types of steps are, we've discussed that on many an episode in here. Your version was walking and then moving into running. But for me, the thing that is most inspiring is how can you encourage people to take those steps, or make the phone call as you did, regardless of their age?
There are so many ways. Physical activity is really, really important. I can't stress that enough. And it's about all types of physical activity. So I talk about suppleness, strength, stamina, and skill. Your suppleness is in your flexibility. So, why do we move our arms up and backwards? It's not a functional activity unless you happen to be a backstroke swimmer. But one of the reasons I would encourage people to do all of these strange stretching movements that they see around is that the first thing you do if you trip or slip is you fling your arms out. Your body naturally, reflexively flings your arms out and moves and shifts its balance in order to try and stop it from falling. But if you haven't kept all this stuff supple and you haven't rehabbed your injury, done your physio, whatever it happens to be, then you're limiting your ability to save yourself if you do trip or slip. So, that's about suppleness. The skill is also in the balance and coordination. Stamina is the stuff you do, whether it's walking or cycling or swimming or gardening or household chores, and the ability to keep doing that and, to spend the whole Saturday morning or whatever it is cleaning your house. Although I do say that a tidy house is a sign of a wasted life.
But it also brings in brilliant movement. So yes, it's a difficult one, that.
So what you eat is really important. It's not just about calcium and the minerals that you have. It's also about having loads and loads of fresh fruit and vegetables. The greater the variety of the colours, the better, because those colours deliver thousands of what are known as phytochemicals, polyphenols into the body, which our gut will eat and produce some really good healthy things that support our immune system, our brain health, our hormonal system. Smoking is really, really bad for bone health. I don't. There's enough people talk about smoking and the fact that we shouldn't be doing it. So I don't know that. But the other things we need to think about are good sleep. Good sleep and managing stress levels. Stress is a huge impactor. Stress raises cortisol levels in the body. And when cortisol levels are raised chronically, which is what happens with both stress and with if we haven't slept properly, what happens is it interferes with those bone building cells, and so it decreases bone production. It interferes with our ability to absorb nutrients and particularly calcium from our gut. It interferes with our ability for our kidneys to reabsorb calcium from urine that's been filtered out. But it also inhibits reproductive hormones, for those who are premenopause. Sleep raises those cortisol levels as well. We now know that cortisol is responsible for chronic inflammation in the body, which underlies all of those long-term conditions like heart disease and obesity and cancers and so on. So anything you can do to improve your sleep hygiene is good. In terms of what you need to do, Chief Medical Officer recommends 150 minutes of brisk activity a week, plus the number of sessions, 2 sessions of resistance training. But, I'm the first one to recognise that if you've never done any physical activity before, that is such an overwhelming amount of activity to do. Where on earth do you start?
That feels like John O'Groats to Land's End for some people.
It's just overwhelming. So what I try and encourage with my groups is 12 minutes a day. And of that 12 minutes, that 12 minutes I think of in terms of, you don't even have to find 12 minutes. You can do most people brush their teeth for 2 minutes twice a day. And during that time, if you attempt to stand on one leg whilst touching the basin, if that's what you need to do, even if it's only for a few seconds, and swap into the other leg. If you could do that, just practice doing that for 2 minutes twice a day whilst you brush your teeth. That amounts to nearly 2 hours of balance practice a month without finding any more time in your day. But then, this stuff I've just been sort of, stretching my arms out or whatever those stretches happen to be, you can do those while you're watching TV, in the adverts, if you don't, if that's what's needed. You can do press-ups against the wall or squats whilst the kettle's boiling. You can, whilst you're on the phone. How much time do people spend on the phone?
Absolutely.
Whether you're speaking to somebody or whether you're doom scrolling, you can do a wall sit. Sitting against the wall, working those legs whilst you're doing it. When you go to the supermarket for a top-up shop, don't take a trolley, take a basket.
Yeah, exactly.
Carry it around the store.
Or two. I recently did a post where a lot of people take the really shallow trolleys because they're only getting a little. And I say, no, don't take the shallow trolley, take 2 baskets, then even better.
Well, I guess I'd say take one, because when you hold a weight in one hand, you're working both sides of the body differently. When you're holding 2, you're only working both sides in the same way. But if you're moving the basket from one side to the other as you're going around,
both have benefits.
So you've got benefits both ways, yes. And if you have to drive to the supermarket, and if you've parked further away, at the bottom of the car park, then you have to carry your shopping that much further to go back to it.
So it's all about these, which I talk about a lot. These lifestyle additions that can help you to reframe how you see moving your body, and can help you to build that capability or the feeling of capability. A lot of that comes with building your confidence too, that you can do these things. If you've been feeling fearful, you've given us a huge amount to think about today. Hugely inspiring story. And we're going to put everything, links to your, particularly your YouTube film, but also your Instagram, the Running Granny on Instagram. So please, everyone, go and follow Angela. Super grateful for your time today, Angela. That was really interesting, and I think everyone will have taken away that if it's worth having a dream, it's worth that possible dream to try and go for it.
Well, as I say, the ultimate goal is being independent until I breathe my last. It's what that journey looks like between now and then. And as you said, 15 years ago, I had no idea what I would have done in these last 15 years. And I certainly have no idea what the next 15 are going to look like.
But you're likely better equipped. That is for sure.
My focus is to be as fit as I am now in 10 years' time. And the other thing final thing I'd say, you might think that 2 minutes doing this or a minute doing something else doesn't seem worth it. But actually, in terms of your health pension, each activity that you do is putting a little something in the bank, and you might not see the results now or next week or next month, but in the long run they'll be there.
Perfect. I absolutely love that. Beautifully said. And the perfect place to end. Thank you so much for your time, Angela.
Very welcome.
I hope you've enjoyed listening, and if you have, you can help by doing 3 things. First, press the follow button to tell podcast platforms you want to listen again. Second, please give the show a 5-star rating and leave a review about why you liked it. And third, I'd love you to share it with friends and family or on your socials, for which I'm truly thankful. Finally, if this podcast is making you want to start reclaiming your own movement, join me in the Reclaim Movement membership for classes, both live and by replay, and countless videos of mini movement breaks to add into your daily life, covering practical and fun, important natural movements. Visit reclaimmovement.co.uk/membership to get started with your 7-day free trial. See you for the next episode, and thank you so much for listening.